Welcome to the Midlife Midsters Podcast, your podcast for inspiration on being bold and saying yes to making the most of midlife.
I'm Leslie Ann.
I'm Marla.
And I'm Mary Ann.
And today we have a special guest, career coach Paula Brand, author of The Purple Parachute, A Woman's Guide to Navigating the Wind's Career Change. Welcome, Paula.
Thank you. It's an honor to be your guest today.
For our listeners who followed our first season of this podcast, Paula is the sister of Lisa Battaglia, who is also an author, and who we interviewed last season about her two-novel midlife romance series. Paula, your book is not a work of fiction, it's a work of nonfiction, and it's a guide for women contemplating career changes. And although it doesn't have the word midlife in the title, you did have midlife, mid-career women in mind when you wrote this book. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and about your interest in this area?
Sure, thanks. Broadly, my professional experience covers the industries of workforce development, human resources, and career advising. I started my own business in 2011 when I was working full-time in workforce development, and I founded Brand Career Management, and I worked full-time in workforce development and then part-time, obviously, where I could fit it in on evenings and weekends seeing clients. And I dreamt about the day that I could run my business full time. And in a few years, that opportunity presented itself. I was the lead career advisor in a workforce development office, and my boss came to me and said that because of budget cuts, one of us was going to have to go, and I was going to be tasked with deciding who it was. And I went through the model that I share in the book, which I call the Astor model, and basically came to the conclusion that I was ready for full-time entrepreneurship. And so I surprised everyone by laying myself off. And that was sort of the beginning of me going full-time in my business.
That's actually a very bold move. And where did you go from there? Like, you started with career coaching, correct?
Yep, I've been doing career advising in one way or another, sometimes as a career counselor, sometimes as a career coach, depending on where I lived and the credentials that and the requirements for those titles. But I always was very interested in midlife women. And so that's what my business focus is on now, is empowering midlife or mid-career to executive women. And I've only just continued to hone in on that audience because it just feels so great when I work with women. When I work with a man, it's not like I can't help them. And I've had a lot of success with men, but it's very transactional. It's like I give them what they need and then they go. With the women I work with, I get off the call and I'm just energized. I just find my work with women is much more fulfilling, energizing, and really that's who I want to help the most.
Paula, do you find, well, talking about women and men, do you find that women pivot in midlife career-wise to follow a passion that they've had? Do they stay in the same line of work, or do they just take that risk and go for it? Is that the piece that energizes you? Is they're looking at this pivot as something exciting, brand new, different path?
I think it depends on where the woman is. I think many times people do change careers after the kids leave the house and they have more financial ability to try something different that maybe doesn't bring them the same level of income where they were making. But plenty of people, I think, also just excel in their careers and need help moving up within the system. Right. So I think both things happen. And the energizing part, I do love helping people with assessments and learning about themselves, but I also really love when someone lands a job. So I don't think it's necessarily where the woman is in her or the transition she's making. It's really just about empowering her to do whatever it is she does want to do.
Yeah.
How exactly did you come about the idea for writing this book? Like the Astor model, which you lay out, which if you could just kind of explain what that is that like a standard, or is that something that you came up with?
I wrote the book mainly to demystify the career management and career transition process. I have had the benefit of having two parents that have been great role models in different ways. And so my dad was an executive recruiter. He started his own business in 1963 in New York City. And we had to have resumes in our teen years just because, that's the way it was. And he might ask you an interview question at dinner and things like that. So I had the benefit of that, but most people don't have that. And I've learned that common sense to most people isn't common, especially when it comes to career management. People are very intimidated and confused, but I always say it's not rocket science. There is a pattern, and if you follow a process, you can do it. But if it's not familiar to you, it can be very intimidating. So I did it to demystify that process and spread the word to women that it doesn't have to be that hard. I mean, I will acknowledge that there are some unique circumstances that might be very difficult, but in general, trying to figure out what you want to do mostly takes self-reflection and time and effort. But it's not that it's so difficult. It's not statistics. It's not, it's not how to fix a refrigerator or things like that. But there isn't really an instruction manual anywhere. What Color Your Parachute by Richard Bowles, which is sort of the seminal book for my field, I think that is sort of a manual. And I did get inspired from his book in terms of writing my book, and even the title having the word parachute in it is an ode to Richard Bowles. But in my book, I focus more stories about women. Each chapter has a story that illustrates the point. And so that's how it differs in that way. The other reason I wrote the book was to share more resources. I've always been someone who likes to share resources. I believe in abundance, not scarcity.
Yeah, that was one of the things I liked about the book, is that it's a combination of explanation and then exploration. So you have an explanation of what you're doing and what you recommend the reader do, and then there's actually a chance to do it because you have worksheets and things.
Exactly. So it's very hands-on. I could never write a book like my sister, a novel. I'm very practical and kind of direct. And the thought of writing a novel, I don't know that I have the skills to do that. But sharing information is something I've always done well. And so I wanted to share that information with as many women as possible. And I realized that writing a book was probably the best way, because there's only so many hours in the day. Even if I tried to meet with every woman I could possibly meet with, it's still not going to be as many people as might read a book.
And so the Astor can you explain that?
Thank you for keeping me honest. So the Astor model, the A stands for assess, the S stands for seek, as in seek out information, the T is for test, the E is for execute, and the R is for repeat. In terms of assessment, I also talk about your vines. And sorry to talk in so many acronyms. I don't like to talk in jargon, but I created these acronyms to make them easy to remember for the reader. And I love gardening, which I know some of you also do. And so I was kind of gravitated towards the flower analogies. But the vines are your values. The I is for interests. The N is for natural disposition or personality. The E is for exceptional qualities, which I also call your superpowers. And the S is for skills. And skills could be transferable, which are the most important skill set to look at if you are changing careers. But there's also job-specific skills and traits. Some traits are like skills, like being on time is sort of a skill. It's also a trait. So the first part of the model, the A, is assessing your vines. And you really need to know those things about yourself in order to move to the next letter. Seeking out information would be talking to people who do the job that you think you want to do, such as informational interviews. And you can do a lot of research online. There's onetonline.org, which is the U.S. Department of Labor website that has a wealth of information about careers in the U.S. And that can tell you how much money you'd make, if there's growth in that field, and the education and skills you need to do the job. And that's great for initial research, but ultimately you really have to talk to a human being who does the job. So that's all in the seeking out information. Then you go into the S and seek out those things that I mentioned, like salary, education, skills, and projected growth. Then you go into the T, which is testing out. And testing could be volunteering with an organization or within the organization where you work. Volunteering is a great way to test out a role and not be too tied to it in case it doesn't turn out to be as you think. Internships, returnships are really very common now, especially for women, there's a lot of programs. There's one on Wall Street, and I don't have all the names of all of them, but there are a lot of returnships where they're specifically targeting women who worked professionally and then took off time to take care of a family or children or parents, and then want to get back to work. And then there's even midternships these days, which is just a mid-career internship. So you're not out of college, basically. Job shadowing is another great way to test out a job, follow someone with what they do every day and see if you like it. And these different ways allow you to try out a role and see if it's the right thing. And then execute. That chapter 10 talks about execution in 3 ways. One would be job search, one would be entrepreneurship, and one would be developing in place. And that would just be if you love where you work, maybe you love the company, maybe you're vested in a pension, maybe you love your boss, but you just don't like what you're doing anymore. That would be developing in place, would be finding another way to find a different role within the company. Chapter 11 goes into just job search, because I think the majority of the people who read the book are going to need those resources. And so chapter 11 goes into resume tips and interviewing advice. And then the last chapter is repeat. Actually, the second to last chapter is repeat. And that's because all of us, well, any young professional is going to have multiple careers in their lifetime, not just multiple jobs. And even some of us have had multiple careers. So it's very important to know that you're going to go through this process more than once.
Do you find that women specifically have different career challenges when they're making career pivots than men do?
Yes and no. So, men and women all get laid off. That laying off doesn't seem to go along gender lines. I think with women, the difference is they'll have more career transitions in their lifetime because they often take time off of their career in order to take care of family. The other thing is that divorce and becoming a widow, those activities, of course, spouses of either gender can pass away, but they tend to affect women more powerfully.
Paula, can you tell us a little bit when you were talking about some women come to you because they're going to go into or interested in entrepreneurship? Like, are they following a passion that they've always wanted to do? Have they been in an industry that they've learned a lot from and feel like they could spin that off to pretty much cultivate that themselves? When people come to you, women specifically come to you about entrepreneurship, can you give us a couple of examples of what you see?
Sure. I think usually with entrepreneurship, it's to bring in more income or an additional source of income, or to have what I call career insurance, because these days no job is really secure. And so I think entrepreneurship has become very common while you're having a full-time job as well, or even if you're, want to jump into it full time. And it's usually related to a superpower or a skill the person has, but it doesn't necessarily need to be tied to their day job. Someone in my family is currently working as a social media manager, working for companies on social media campaigns, things like that. And she is thinking about becoming a flower, someone who basically makes arrangements for special occasions and things like that. So she would be an example of someone who's doing something totally different. But I think that most people are probably developing or just leveraging a skill that they already have. Like maybe they work in social media and then on the side, they're going to help other people manage their social media accounts. So I think it's a little bit of both.
I do have younger friends that are in their 30s and early 40s, and they talk about their side hustles. And it's exactly what you're talking about. There are these jobs that they're taking on and creating entrepreneurship as like a side hustle. So they still have their main job. I don't see that a lot in my age group. Maybe I just haven't run into that yet in the 50s or the 60s. But I do see the younger generation earning more income from their regular job by doing these side hustles, and they love it.
Yeah, I think that I'm 53, and I would say that for people my age and maybe, 10 years older, they're probably more likely going into entrepreneurship after retiring from a career. And so I think if I remember correctly from previous episodes, you were in the workforce for 30 years, and now you're at a point where you could do something totally different. And
That's
so
right.
you would be an example of someone, you might become a landscape gardener, or maybe
Or a
a sailing
podcast
instructor
host.
or a podcast host. Yeah. So I think for people who are maybe 50s, 60s, it's probably one thing ending and a new thing beginning. But I agree with you, for the 20, 30, 40-year-olds, to them, it's just normal to have a portfolio career.
One of the other things I picked up from reading your book, and tell me if I've got this right, but I think sometimes when we think about career change and we feel dissatisfied, and I think maybe this is particularly a thing that happens to women, we feel like we need to do something really radically different in order to feel satisfied and fulfilled. And one of the things that I took from your book and from going through the ASTRA process, and particularly the assessment part and the Vines part, is that often what you're doing only really needs a subtle change. Like you can, if you focus and you become more aware of what your interests are and what your natural disposition is, you can sort of see the trends or pathways in your own life that are already there for you that you may not be realizing. So people can make a subtle shift that, like you yourself did, right, in your own career.
Exactly. I think, right, going from career advising as a W-2 employee to career advising as an entrepreneur isn't actually that different. So I agree that can happen. I think for women and midlife women, I would agree that the transitions aren't quite so drastic usually, but they could be, because if someone's gone through a divorce or had some major change in life, they might be, depending on the circumstances, able and ready to do something drastically different. And sometimes there's something that they wanted to do when they were young and they never did it because then they had kids and they got the golden handcuffs and things like that. So sometimes you see that with a radically different path. But I think more often than not, as you said, it's a subtle tweak of the career. For example, my older sister, Julianne, has been a massage therapist, or was a massage therapist, for many years, and it just became too tough on her body to keep doing it. So she became an acupuncturist, which I thought was brilliant because it's a very similar body of knowledge. And so she could draw upon that previous knowledge instead of having to do a totally different field and learning everything new. So I think it's easier to tweak, but sometimes people are just driven to do something totally different. Maybe they followed their parents' goal and now they have the time to follow their own goal. Or, as I said before, something in their life changed so radically in a different way that it prompted them to change their whole life. Like maybe someone loses 200 pounds and they were doing sales and marketing, but now they become a life coach or a fitness coach. And they use their sales and marketing skills for their entrepreneurial business. But at the heart of it, it's a pretty big difference going from sales and marketing executive to fitness coach. It seems drastic, but when you look at what got them there, it makes more sense.
When clients come to you with their ideas, is there a piece of you that has to work with them self-confidence wise, or are they already made the decision, have the self-confidence and ready to move on or to pivot?
I think it depends, and I see both types of clients. So some clients, I take them through the whole process of the A in the ASTRA model. Mm-hmm. That's the first 4 sessions would be looking at their Vines, their interests, their skills, personality, and then helping them flesh out all the things that come up and narrowing it down. But other people do come to me and say, I'm in media and I want to stay in media, but there's something, maybe they're not working in an environment that really respects and promotes women, and so they need to find a different company or a different work environment in order to get where they want to go. I'd say the majority of the people I meet probably do need the assessment piece. They say, I don't know where I want to go. And it's too overwhelming to figure out all the possibilities. I need help with that. It's more, it's less common for someone to know exactly what they want when they get to me. But it does happen, or they just want a promotion within their field. And so that to me, that's someone who knows what they want, but they just don't know how to get there.
Okay.
And in terms of confidence, I'd say all women seems to have issues of confidence. I hate to say that, but it's pretty rare that I have a client. I mean, I can't really even think of one who comes to me and is, I'm so confident I don't need any help. Then why would they call me? So sometimes it's people are not confident because it's so overwhelming to figure out where to go next. But sometimes the process. Sometimes they're amazing in their field and they just haven't been working in good environments that value that. So I think the confidence is a piece that comes up over and over again.
Yeah. Paula, you were talking about sort of mid-career, midlife, and we've talked a lot about what's that definition of midlife, right? What is the age range? And I'm curious in terms of career change, if you're seeing issues that I'll say women on the older side of midlife are facing. There's a lot of talk about age discrimination, of people wanting to hire young, of changing your resume so that you don't have the job that you had 32 years ago right out of college. And how do you advise job seekers, career transition moments where you're balancing the depth of your experience, which is really valuable when you're going back to, your superpowers and your skills and your knowledge, with being transparent and being honest about your career, but also not immediately looking like you are 2 years away from Medicare. And so they don't want to take a chance with you and they just let your resume kind of fall to the bottom of the, I guess it's now a figurative pile because everything's electronic.
I know, though. There are still some paper piles, but yeah, most of it is electronic. I would say, I'd say ageism happens for younger women and older women. So I think I see it more with older women with the clients I work with, but sometimes young women get the opposite end of you're not experienced enough, or how can this young whippersnapper, manage me or teach me something? So the younger women also get sort of the opposite end, but I do see ageism more affecting older women. And my advice is usually to focus on what you bring to the table and the value you bring to the table, not, how long you've been in the workforce. And I will never tell a client to lie, but I do make a point that you do want to curate the information you're sharing. So in that way, I would recommend for most people, if you have a chronological style resume because you've been in the same field for 30 years, you probably don't need the first few jobs that you had, and putting them on there will make you look older. And so that will probably make you less competitive in the field. In the same vein, I would often recommend taking off years for education because they're not really necessary. For a younger woman, it might be to not call out that you just graduated last year. And for an older woman, it would be so that they can't guess your age. I know that Leslie Ann talked in a former episode about changing her hair color. And I have a close colleague who did the same thing. She went gray and she loves it, but it was a big decision. And I usually say to women that if you have to decide how you're going to play the game. Sometimes you do have to dye your hair to get the job that you want in a certain field at a certain company. But I always say, just be yourself, because if you dye your hair to get that job and then you change your hair color and they weren't going to be accepting in the first place, it's probably not going to bode well for you in the long run. So I think it's better to be yourself and then find employers that are accepting of you as you are, rather than trying to fit a mold and then feeling like you're suppressing your true self. I mean, I say that to people of color. I say that to people, I have a lot of people who say, I don't want to put my picture on LinkedIn because I don't want them to see my race or how old I am. And I say the same thing for that. Well, eventually when you walk into the interview room, they're going to see you. And if they have that prejudice, they're still going to have it. So why not save everyone time? Just put a picture of what you really look like. And if you don't get that interview, it's probably best for you that you don't get that interview.
I'm curious if you have any special advice for women that might be coming into the workforce after a hiatus for raising family and children. Like, is there a better place to start? You talked about one of the things is sort of, I can't remember the word you used, but it's like an internship, but not really an internship.
A returnship.
Returnship. Is that the best place for somebody to start if they're coming back into the workforce?
It depends on the industry. So certain industries like finance, IT, legal, there's certain industries that are really catering to the returnships. And if you Google returnships, you'll see there's something called Excel. I think I can't remember. I'm sorry. I can't remember the exact title, but there's some very specific programs. One's on Wall Street. There's a program in California where I think it's called Reboot Excel. And they have relationship with specific employers. And those are mostly for professional jobs. I don't think you're going to find that for non-professional jobs. But that can be a great way. But it's very limited in terms of it's not in every industry. And it's not even, it has definitely become a trend where if you Google that word, you'll see results. But it's not like every company has a returnship program. So that is great for specific industries. IT is another one, I'd say, where you see that. But in terms of just the average woman coming back to work in, say, any industry, I think it's most important to really draw upon your network, because networking is always important for every job search and all career management. And the reason your network's so important in that kind of situation is because you need people who know you, who are willing to give you a chance, who know you're very reliable, they know you're a hard worker and all these other things. And that they might overlook that you have 5 years of recent experience in that industry. So I think networking is hugely important. And also the community. Most women who have taken time off to take care of family have been volunteering in schools and have been volunteering in the community. And those are great networks to try to help you. Again, they've seen you in action. They know what you can do. So drawing upon the community relationships that you've created, the strong network, supporting yourself with strong women who believe in you. I think those are all some keys. Changing the way your resume looks. Also, if you are going back into the workforce after a break, you'll probably have more luck if you go into what you were doing before you left the workforce. But that said, doesn't mean you can't just start fresh, because you do have a gap. And if you look at your transferable skills, sometimes you can very easily transfer your target based on your transferable skills and easily move into another field if it's a related field, or you use very similar skill sets.
So I want to move into a different and related field for a second, and that's to talk a little bit about you and some other bold decisions that you made in your midlife, including about your living circumstances and how you managed to continue working, but also radically changed your life circumstance.
Yes, I think I know what you're referring to. So I have made some drastic career life changes. Most recently, in 2021, in the fall of 2021, my husband and I sold our house in Annapolis, Maryland, and bought an RV and basically became nomads. And I kept my business, and I call myself a nomadic career coach in some ways, and I work out at the RV. And I guess that's not really, there's a trend. So it's not a shock if you've known me for a long time, because in my 30s, my husband and I did something similar where we sold the house that we owned at the time and put on backpacks and traveled the Asian Pacific Rim for a year.
Fun.
So yeah, so we love to travel, and we've definitely had times in our life that we've done something crazy like that. We don't have children, so that definitely helps. I would say, although I do know people who have children and have made the same type of drastic life changes, and there are different reasons. So in my 30s, it was because we had the itch to travel. In 2021, it was because one of my in-laws has Alzheimer's, and we really needed to be closer to where she is in order to be on call, basically, if things go bad. So from 2021 October till about this last May, we were traveling full time, and I was still working, and we would basically do a 5-week sprint, if you will, and then go back to my mother-in-law's for a week, and then go out for 6 weeks and come back for a week. And then more recently this summer, things changed a little bit. So we are more knee deep into the elder care. And now we're doing maybe once a month, we go for a week-long RV trip.
How adventurous. That sounds wonderful.
It has its pros and cons.
Yeah.
It is interesting. For me, I'm like Leslie Ann, where I like structure and I like predictability, and I'm a strong J on the Myers-Briggs. So for me, it's fun, but it is also a challenge because every place is different and you're always getting used to different things. I was thinking this morning just how it's funny because I'm staying at my mother's house for a few weeks right now, and my lifestyle allows me to do that. And so that's one nice thing about being a nomad, is that I can spend time with my mother too in New York. But I had this funny analogy that I realized with all the shower handles, the hot and cold, because over the past 2 years, I've taken showers in many different places, whether it's a campground or my mother's house or my mother-in-law's house. And, they're all different. And this morning I found myself like, wait, which do I go? Both go to the right, both go to the left, both go to the middle, both go out. And I sort of thought it was a little analogy for how I've had to be adaptable and how every day might be a little different.
What I think is fascinating about this, though, is that you see a lot of young people these days who take off and they equip a van or they get a small RV and they live on the road and they work, and it is possible to do that in the current economy, but it's not something that you see people at our stage of life doing. And I admire that you have simultaneously maintained your career, fed your love of travel, and figured out a way to look after your elderly family members. And I just think that's really quite remarkable. It's a trifecta of sorts.
Thank you. It's challenging. And, it is funny because the van life, I think when I tell people over the past couple years what we're doing, I think a lot of my peers think it's very glamorous and, oh, I'd love to do that. But I do also point out, there are very unglamorous parts of it, like cleaning the black water and, like I said, not knowing how to turn off the shower properly. So it is exciting and it is fun. But I think that those YouTube videos of people having the van life it's like most social media. They're only showing you the good parts.
Paula, do you have any last words of wisdom for our listeners about making career changes or even making important life decisions at midlife?
I think my biggest advice or what I would want the listeners to hear is that it's really important to take stock of yourself and tune in to what career move would make you most satisfied or what life change would make you most satisfied. And that it's very important to have a strong community of women. It could be a few people, it could be a handful of women, but people who get you and who support you and that you trust. So when you're going to make a big change, it's definitely important to have that support. But I think it's just important to know it can be done, because a lot of people just immediately think it's not possible to change careers midlife. And especially women with all the responsibilities and different roles they play, they think they might be impossible, but it's not. It does take time. It's not like a magic wand, like, one day you're going to be this new career, but it can be done.
Well, thank you so much, Paula. We really appreciate your time. And for our listeners, you can follow us at www.americanmidsters.com. We welcome your comments and suggestions for future episodes.